Okay, so before we dashed off to fulfill our nicotine and urinary needs, Nick, you had a question for me about translating one thing from one medium to another,
Yeah.
and I wondered if you could just ask me that question again.
No. Just
Well, okay, I
go
guess
in.
we're done here.
No. So I watched John Wick. I realized that it's a sort of story you can only tell in cinema. You couldn't tell it in a TV series. You couldn't tell it in a comic book series because you just haven't had the time. The restriction in it is page count. It's seconds. It's all about the fluidity of movement, and in a comic book, it would take an insane amount of work to do that.
Sure.
Have you ever listened to something musically or experienced something auditorially that you think that you probably couldn't translate with the tools you have to hand?
It's interesting that when you asked me this question the first time, you used the example of an orchestra and like compared that to the idea of being a solo artist and then hearing an
Which,
orchestra.
to be fair, is a really shitty example because your post rock projects very much do that anyway already. Like you are a one man post rock band, which is a quite strange thing to be in this ever. Especially day and age. I realize that's it. Like it's never been a usual thing for something to be.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is an element of orchestration and elements of the orchestral in post rock anyway, and
Mm-hmm.
that is relatively easy to build up in that you just keep adding layers and adding textures and melodies, and as long as you don't sort of lose sight of the overall sort of narrative thrust of the music, then it's sort of surprisingly easy to build up that kind of denseness of sound. I think the example that I would want to use actually goes in completely the opposite direction because one of the bands that I'm really into at the moment is a band called Teen Suicide, which is just the worst band name ever. In a pretty strong field, that's a pretty bad band name. And a lot of their material was recorded with the onboard laptop microphone,
Hmm.
and so it's very very scratchy, and there's almost no bass in it whatsoever because just this tiny microphone can't cope
You
with it.
can't produce bass. Yeah.
Yeah, and so everything's kind of clipping a little bit. The vocals are very much sort of in the background, and it's something I'm really interested in. And one of the projects that I'm currently sort of got my eye on is doing something deliberately lo-fi. And the thing about Teen Suicide is that it's really not about what the instruments are playing. I know that sounds like a stupid thing to say when it comes to music,
Hmm.
but in terms of mechanically what the instruments are doing, that's not really important. It's all about the sound and how that's kind of evocative of a certain time and place.
Yeah.
And certainly, again, I think that's the kind of thing which is only really available to you in retrospect.
Hmm.
In that when you're creating something, you don't think that it's evocative of that time and place because you're focused on making it, and it's only later you read it back or you listen to it back and you just think, oh, that's I had to be at that time and place in order to create that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I guess in a way that's just the nostalgia principle at work. But certainly, when you listen to Teen Suicide, like they have a song called "Haunt Me," and they have a song called "Cop Graveyard," and it's all, yeah. Honestly, they're a lot better than they sound, which is another weird thing to say about musicians. But yeah, they just seem to have this very kind of evocative sense of place and time,
Hmm.
which really just scratches a particular itch in my brain and apparently in quite a few people's brains as well. So I don't know whether that's something which can't be translated or something I can't do with the tools to hand, but it's certainly not the kind of thing that you can do and be aware of doing.
So it's really weird because like you just actually just made my head sort of collapse slightly there because you just said something about the idea of not knowing that you're being evocative over time and place when you're doing the artwork.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, like I you know Oasis did know they were going to be the spirit of the '90s when they were in the '90s doing it. That kind
No,
of
of course
thing.
not. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a quote I know about this quote because it starts an art book by Ashley Wood, who's one of my favorite comic book artists. It's Un Torino. It's Uno Torino. It's a really good art book. I bought like when I probably couldn't afford it.
Yeah, yeah.
I was much younger and it cost about 25 quid, and I bought it, and it was like that was my big purchase for the month. You know what I mean? And the quote's by Gustav Klimt. It's really small in the bottom corner. It looks like legal wording,
Uh-huh.
and it just says, "Whoever wants to know something about me, as an artist, which alone is significant, they should look attentively at my pictures, and there seek to recognize what I am and what I want."
Okay.
Which to me sort of to counter what you just said, yeah, whilst you don't know you're evocative of a time period, all you can know is that you're evocative of what you're thinking at that point in time. The art you're creating is reflective of you, and maybe you're just reflective of a wider feeling at this period of time of history.
Sure, yeah, and I think I mean Klimt is a good example of this actually because he was his work was criticized for being pornographic at the time, um, and it is kind of fascinating how it almost happens accidentally, where you'll occasionally get an album or a piece of art which is so incredibly evocative of a particular time and
Yes.
place, but it just happens. It has to happen sort of organically.
Well, if you want to be a real pretentious twat, you could say reflective of the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I deliberately tried
Um,
to not use the word zeitgeist in them.
Yeah, I'm a blunderer in all things in life. I'll just plow straight through into that. But yeah, it's the sort of collective unconsciousness boils forth whatever you're doing in that particular time, and therefore you become evocative through a moment in your life, but also through others.
Yeah, the one example that always really stands out to me is
Harry
Eels.
Potter, Harry
No, no,
Potter,
no.
Harry Potter. It's Harry Potter.
It's the song "Susan's House" by Eels.
Oh, I like that. It's a good song. I
Yeah,
can't remember the album.
it was from Beautiful Freak,
Oh
and
yeah,
it
which is
came
also yeah.
it came out in '97,
Hmm.
and it's basically it uses a little piano sample from "Love Finds Its Own Way," I think, by Gladys Knight and the Pips.
Hmm.
And basically, the narrative of the song, it's basically just this one character going through, like walking through a city and just like making glib observations about all the kind of unfortunate stuff that he sees. And like there's a bit where he says, "I'm walking down the street and I see a young girl
Oh
who can't
yeah.
be older than 16 and she's pushing a pram, and I'm thinking that has to be her sister, right?" And it's like,
Ha- it has to be your sister, right?
yeah, exactly. And it's just, and all these kind of very typical kind of young person in New York kind of things to comment on. It's so completely pre 9/11 that you just can't imagine it ever existing afterwards, because he's going through New York and he's talking about all like these like social decline, and he's talking about all these kind of strange things which are happening in society, and it's just like the shadow of like this coming catastrophe just hangs over that entire album, and in particular over that one song. And you listen to it and you just think, oh God, you think these are real problems, and I'm sure they are real problems, but you've got no idea how much worse
Yeah,
it's going to get.
you have no idea what happens next.
Yeah, exactly. And it almost has a kind of sort of dramatic irony to it, in that like the audience knows a lot more than the characters knows,
Yeah.
except it's
Yeah.
not fictional. This was a song which was written and produced by an artist in all
Well,
good sincerity.
it's 1996, and it's about Pasadena, California. So you couldn't get more sort of contained, could you?
No, no, exactly.
Uh, the the interesting thing is this is a wonderful song, which is Mr. E's Beautiful Blues,
Right,
which
okay.
is the like, goddamn right, it's gonna be a goddamn, it's a beautiful day.
Yeah.
Aha, that one.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
That one's all about sort of again, how it's a wonderful day, how it's great, but how the world's a fucking horrible, terrible place.
Yeah.
And that song featured prominently in the 2000 film Road Trip. So, you know, yeah, here's a fun fact. Everett states that letting the song be used for Road Trip is one of the few real regrets he's ever had. He only agreed to it because a record company threatened not to release the album if he did not go along with the recording of the video clip.
Oh wow, that really sucks.
Yeah, he hated shooting the video, and as of 2008, he said he'd never actually seen the movie, which is a fact that I'd like to think that I could share with him, but unfortunately I've seen it many times.
I always feel like Eels is kind of an interesting sort of example of that as well, because it's almost like, you know how the seer Cassandra was cursed with telling prophecies which became true,
Yeah.
but nobody ever believed her. Yeah, I kind of feel like Mark Everett is almost like the inverse of that, isn't it? That he keeps talking about, even since 9/11, even all his albums since then, they all have this kind of naivety to them, and I distinguish like innocence from naivety, because like he's talking about all this stuff and he's like, oh yeah, this is really like hard hitting social commentary, and every time he releases an album something even more terrible happens, which renders it completely outdated straight away.
I absolutely love his music. Like, I absolutely adore his music.
It's like he's doomed to just constantly be walking behind the bandwagon, isn't he?
I do feel he's constantly doomed to be sort of looking in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that really sums it up, doesn't it? He's kind of constantly on the wrong side of history.
And now, some chat about morality and robots.
So an interesting conversation occurred at work the other day
Go on.
that I'm going to share with you, despite the fact that I'm going to mention no names about anyone involved.
Yeah, we've had issues on this podcast before. Mostly the issues involve Nick revealing stuff that he signed a non-disclosure act to not reveal. And that was one half of the issue, and the other half of the issue was that I forgot to edit it out.
Yeah. You did, though, before the one you put online, right?
I have, yes, of course I did.
Yeah. I work with, yeah, that's a good one, a company that develops very high-tech automobiles.
Okay.
So good so far, right? And we were talking about self-driving systems the other day, and I was talking to a programmer, and we had a personal conversation a bit back. We were talking about the morality of electric cars. There is a video, a very popular YouTube video at the moment, of an electric car, a self-driving electric car, detecting a collision prior to it happening and just avoiding the collision happening completely.
Mm-hmm.
And we got into the conversation about, it's sort of the age-old philosophical conversation of, would you rather crash the train and kill the 12 people on it, or run over the fat man tied to the tracks?
Yes, exactly.
And we were sort of talking about it, and imagine there's a crossway, four-way junction, bus comes out, you're gonna go straight through, you're gonna crash into the school children, or you could crash into the pillar, and it will kill the driver. Which will your electric car make you do?
Yes, which will the safety system in the car elect to go for? Will it swerve into the bus, or will it swerve into the pillar?
Yeah, and I was so obviously there's a morality question. The question is, will it kill a bunch of kids or will it kill you? I was talking to a programmer. I asked him that question. He said, "Won't happen," just very flatly.
Okay,
Won't
but
happen. And I was like, "Care to explain why?" And the answer he gave me was like really fucking obvious. I'd never thought about it.
go on.
And I'm really into phenomenology and sort of study of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a lot of books on alien phenomenology. I read books by Dylan Trigg and people like that who talk about non-human thinking. And even I didn't think about this. The reason is because if you're a human, your cone of vision is telling you that these are your options.
Right.
If you're a car that is covered in cameras and sensors, there is always a different direction you can go in.
Okay.
So your car would, if you were to do this and crash forward, your car would just drop it into a complete reverse
Okay.
and just go somewhere else will hit no one and save everyone's life.
Oh, see, I had this vision when you were talking about this programmer, because the idea of like programming, it's a bit unfair to call it morality, but programming binary choices into a self-operating vehicle.
Yeah.
Like I had this image that all the programmers would also be like amateur philosophers or something, and they'd be
No,
like,
like One of the things the company has done is it's not gone, how can we stop this? It's gone, how can we make all of this impossible?
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of like there is a really funny comic book series called the Perry Bible Fellowship,
Yes.
and there's one of those where a guy writes a suicide note, and it says, "I'm fed up of living in this dream world. I can't take it anymore." It sort of shows him lying down on a railway track in front of a tunnel, and a train's coming, and the train flies out the tunnel with big falcon wings and like mighty coloured rainbows flying around it, and
Yeah.
that's the dream world he's talking about. Is that nothing makes any sense?
Oh, I
It's-
see. Right.
So it's kind of like if you've got two options: you crash into the fat man or crash and kill the tall people. Then just instead of doing that, the train just flies upwards. Like
Well, that was the other thing I was thinking of. Like, one, it's kind of nice that you got these like very utilitarian programmer solutions to these philosophical problems. But also, when you were talking about like the programmer who said, "Nah, it won't ever happen," I kind of imagined that his solution to that was an ejector seat.
But that's the whole point, is that like they've designed a series of software where the computer doesn't think, how can I save X many lives? The computer's thinking, how can I stop this so nothing happens? Like it's because it all comes down to the idea that a second in your human brain capacity to a computer system that is working at so many more gigabytes per second than you,
Sure.
it's got fucking years to work the problem out.
Yeah, it's always like it's one of those ideas of like machines, not even just speaking in English, but speaking in human language. You see it all the time in films, like you have like droids or automated robots or something, and they'll talk to other robots in human language, like in English, and it's like I get like on a narrative level if these robots are characters or if they've got expository dialogue, like the audience has to understand
It's
it.
kind of like it harks. I don't know if it made it into the podcast, but it's like when I talked about Data, the android, and Star Trek having to type. Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
It's
exactly.
like you're
Yeah,
using a very inefficient way of communicating something very efficient.
yeah. I mean, the example that I often bring up in this because it is so inconsistent with the rest of the canon is the fact that the battle droids in the Star Wars prequels talk to each other in English.
Yeah.
But then in the Star Wars Holiday Special, which, if anybody doesn't know, was a sort of made-for-TV variety show featuring Star Wars characters, which was filmed, I think, between A New Hope and Empire Strikes
I
Back.
think so too.
Yeah, and literally the entire first 10 minutes of that center around a Wookiee, like Chewbacca's family, like a Wookiee family, and the first 10 minutes of it are just Wookiees talking to each other in Wookiee language, and there are no subtitles. There's no helpful voiceover. It's just Wookiee noises for 10 minutes. But I mean, I mean, in a way, the idea of having like the Wookiees talking to each other just in Wookiee language and not having any voiceover and not having any subtitles or anything, that's actually more consistent. Like that's more consistently appropriate than it is having robots talk to each other in human language, or having Data in Star Trek having to use a keyboard or something.
I felt really upset with myself though for a while that like I was thinking in completely human terms to think about something completely non-human.
Oh man, the door is wide open there for me to say, oh man, you're only human, but I'm gonna resist that.
Thanks. But there's like a real electroma moment where I'm trying to put like a human face on, like the idea that the car will actually calculate the impact of other cars on it and see if that would be safer. So like a person wouldn't stop on the junction because they think that other cars will hit them, but this car can work out whether or not them hitting them would actually be more beneficial to them to get them safer away from something else.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is something that a person hasn't got time or imagination to think of. So,
Sure, and you got to think like at that point you got adrenaline as well, and your just like your mechanical physical ability to press one pedal or another pedal might be impaired. You're under an awful lot of stress. Everything's and the whole thing's over and done in the time it's taken me to describe it.
Yeah. I mean, like, I actually did some self-driving the other day. I mean, like, I did.
Oh yeah, how was it?
It was really strange. I mean, because you're completely offering up your vehicle to just do what it wants.
Yeah.
You kind of anticipate it. You're the weak link because you're working against it. You're like, no, we're gonna brake, and you brake too sharply, and you're like, you should just let the car do it.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't drive, and I don't know how to drive. I've never learned how to drive. So I think it'd be interesting to like put someone like me in a self-driving car, and then versus someone like you who's been driving for a few years, and then versus somebody who's been driving their
Yeah.
whole life,
Well, the thing is, that
and
actually,
see how they react
they
differently.
call it one pedal driving. So even when you're actually in control yourself, as soon as because it's not going to gears, you don't need to change clutch or anything. It just you put your
Uh-huh.
foot down, and no matter how you put your foot down the far, it goes fast if you hold it up. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
because usually like you put your foot down, it'll go to a certain speed. You lower the clutch, you take your foot off the accelerator, you change the gear, you put it down, it'll go faster, and so on and so forth.
sure.
With this, you like put it 3/4, put it all the way down. If you're going all the way down, you're in full acceleration.
Yeah, so it's like the idea that the task of driving is now been simplified to the level of like carnival dodgem
Well, yeah,
cars.
exactly. But the other thing as well is that if you take your foot off, your car will stop driving, so it'll stop braking, so it'll start slowing down. So, like, quite literally, if you're driving properly, so it's a one pedal thing, and it's just completely contradictory to what you think that your cars should be doing.
That's going to be really interesting within the next like 10 or 15 years when this technology becomes more widespread. Like, would you be able to just get a driving license just for self-driving cars?
I don't know, because, like, can you get a driving license just for automatics?
Yes, you can.
So,
Yeah.
you probably might be able to. The really weird thing is, though, that it's the car I was in, the car I was test driving, because I can't afford that fucker, but the car I was test driving went 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds. Yeah,
Jesus.
I think that's the top gear section over.
I think well, actually there's just one more thing I want to mention about that,
Okay.
which was I mentioned this to you when I was in Leeds, and it's the idea that that because electric cars are so quiet, there's the idea that you would have to like artificially make them like fit them with engine noise dot
Which is
MP3. You know?
illegal in England.
Yes, I didn't know that, but apparently it's not
Yeah,
legal
you
to
can't,
do
you
that.
can't fit you can't fit external sounder to your vehicle legally within England as part of the modification laws.
Sure, but you know that somewhere someone's done it and has replaced their engine noise revving sound with yakety sax.
I was actually speaking to a guy who who was driving a Nissan Leaf in Belgium. Which is another electric car. Not quite as impressive as other ones that's available in the market. Almost had to save myself there for a second. But he was driving, and it's not legal there. And the guy who owned the car, who was letting a test drive it, had installed many different external sounds, including horse sounds. So like as he's driving along, he's galloping. And he said it was quite primal, is the word he described it. Quite primal. Yeah.
There's something to that, isn't there? Because the link I would make there is that camera technology is now smaller and more powerful than it's ever been. And one of the first things that we did once we got small, powerful cameras on phones was invent Instagram.
Yeah.
The whole idea of which is to make your photos look old and fucked up. And so it's like we invent self-driving cars with all of this incredible technology. The first thing we do is mod it to make it sound like a horse.
Well, I saw the most dumbest thing ever. I think it's a Citroen, but there's one of these new hatchback sort of cars for young drivers has a fucking forward-facing camera that you can take selfies and upload to the internet on. So, like, the company that I am working with at the moment has a car that has about 45 cameras in the front.
Yes.
And they read the road. They literally read the road lines so that when it's doing self-driving, thing, you can keep you in the centre. It reads the speed limit, so it will always update you on what speed limit should be and things like that. So it sort of operates as a second set of eyes. And no point have it ever allowed me to take a photograph of the M62 and email it to my grandma. 'Cause that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard.